All right. We're going to be doing this every week leading up to the MLB draft as the Baltimore Orioles hold the number one pick in the draft. We're going to talk some MLB draft, and joining us for the first one, he is ESPN's MLB draft analyst. He's Kiley McDaniel, and he's with us here on GCR. Kiley, it's Glenn and Paul in Baltimore. It's great to chat with you, man. Thank you so much for taking a couple of minutes for us.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Kiley, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hey, sorry.
For having me.
Hey, it's great to chat with you, man. I apologize. I don't know what happened there. Kiley, it's great to chat with you. I'm hoping that you and I are not having a ton of conversations in the future about the Orioles and top 3 picks. I'm hoping that might be changing in the coming years. But I guess let's just start sort of generically. Right now, how many players do you genuinely believe are possibilities for the Baltimore Orioles to take with the number 1 pick?
The latest sort of intel I've heard is they've worked it down to 5 or 6 guys right now, and I think the sort of top tier of guys they could reasonably consider is probably 7. So I think they've probably, and that's sort of a consensus if you ask around the industry, like who do you think they're really considering? It's anywhere from 6 to 7, maybe 8 guys, and I get the impression that they've probably eliminated 1 or 2 of those guys. But it's still a pretty wide net at this point, and we can obviously go through some of those guys specifically if you want to.
Sure. I guess let me go before we start going through some of the others. There is, of course, the thing where in the Mike Elias regime, the Orioles have taken college bats, and this appears to be a year where there are college bats that can be in the conversation. It seems like there are more high school bats that are part of this. How much of a factor is it that you guys that do this for a living are dealing with the fact that, hey, however we analyze these guys, the track record says we know what the Orioles are taking when they have a pick like this?
Yeah, it's been a big conversation basically since Baltimore clinched the number 1 pick, and it was kind of clear what kind of class this was. So right now I have the top 4 players in the draft are all high school position players.
Right.
Depending on any given day you get a hold of me, it might be 3 out of or 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 4 or whatever. But suffice to say, my top 2, I think, all the way to the end will be high school position players, and then right behind them are 2 more. That typically is the most desired type of player. Like, there's the most, like, all-stars out of all the various demographics come from high school up the middle position players. That's typically where the upside, the exciting stuff, that's what teams kind of pick up here for, is to get that kind of player. Nobody really wants to draft a pitcher this high, and obviously Mike Elias is another one of those people. And the high school or the college players in general, position players are seen as, that's like the safer way out. You're not going to get as much ceiling. A lot of times those guys, like, Pedro Alvarez, for example, will seem like they might be a superstar, but it turns out they're, a little less than that. They'll have Nick Senzel. There's been a lot of examples of this in the last, couple of years. Whereas your superstars tend to come from the top of the July 2 class internationally and the top of the draft high school position players typically is where those players come from. So given Mike's history, there's the Carlos Correa where he cut there, ended up taking the best player. Arguably him or Byron Buxton was the best player. And then it's cut the last 2 years, taking Kauser and Kjerstad and spreading the money around. But when he had a clear number 1 prospect in 2019, he took Adley Rutschman instead of Bobby Witt, who now is, I would say, neck and neck with him as a prospect, but at the time was seen as clearly better. So, like, he's proven that if there is a slam dunk guy, he'll take the slam dunk guy. This year, I think there is a guy that is clearly better, but in talking to some people that are picking up high, they're like, no, it's kind of like last year where there's a lot of different opinions. And the guy that I think is best, which is Druw Jones, the son of Andrew Jones, I think he's clearly the best guy. I think he's probably the consensus guy. If you were to ask around and take a vote, he'd get the most number 1 votes. But I think most teams see it as, there's 4 or 5 guys you could talk yourself into, similar to last year when we saw everyone's rankings get, like, jumbled up in terms of the order based on the way the baseball draft is set up with, like, a hard slotting process, and everyone shops around for prices, and then you pick who you think the best player is for the price rather than just the best player.
He is Kiley McDaniel from ESPN. He's here with us on Glenn Clark Radio. Kiley, why? Why do you believe Druw Jones is that guy, that's the consensus top player?
So I've tried to simplify my process a little bit. It's very easy to get sort of lost in the sauce going through all the different evaluations and models and stats and stuff. And for me, the draft boils down to this, which is don't focus on all the things the guy can't do. We have so many examples of guys like Justin Verlander and Tim Lincecum where it's like, they didn't have command or a third pitch in college. And then it turned out their command got a lot better and their third pitch then becomes their best pitch. They just learn their best pitch in pro ball. So even the, like, polished college pitcher that will get to the big leagues quickly, their scouting report changes so much. Just pick the guy who's good at the stuff you think is important and has the between-the-ears mental makeup stuff to make the adjustments that are necessary. Because everyone, no matter how advanced they are as an amateur, will change a lot. And so for me, if you start with what are they good at, Druw Jones is the only guy in this draft where he has a chance to turn into that Acuna, Soto, Tatis, like that kind of guy, because he has the present skills of some of the other best high school position players in this draft, but he also is 6'3", 6'4", long-limbed. We've got 3 or 4 years. I was watching him as a high school freshman here in Atlanta. He's got all those things you want in terms of performance and now skills, but he has the frame and the twitch athleticism to where, like I saw Fernando Tatis Jr. as a 15-year-old, he was just pretty good. And then by about 17, it was like, oh my gosh, this is a totally different guy because he was long and lanky and projectable, and sometimes that stuff can explode. Druw Jones has some of that same stuff. Now, it's still, 1 in 5, 1 in 6 that he hits anywhere near those sorts of heights, but he's the only guy that has a chance to be that kind of guy.
So why wouldn't a Tamar Johnson have that chance?
So he is a guy that I think has very polarizing views. Part of it is because this year he played at a very low level of competition in the Atlanta area, the sort of small schools. And so, I went to a game and he had 2 strikes thrown to him the entire game and walked 4 times. So it was just, if you parachuted in and saw him for the first time this spring, you just didn't get a good look. It was impossible to really see his talent play. But I think I saw him take 50 plate appearances over the summer, and I've seen him for multiple summers in a row. Another guy around the Atlanta area near me. So he's been easy to evaluate. Now, the sort of limitation in terms of his ability, he's a high school second baseman, which demographically is not very strong. You could probably play him at third if you wanted to. And he is 5'8", 5'9", and is sort of a, mature, filled-out body. I think the comp is Rafael Devers. They look very similar at the same age. I think even the swing mechanics are kind of similar. Devers is a little bit taller, but they both have a lot of the same things going for them. And at the same stage, when Devers was 15 or 16, people were like, I don't know if he's going to keep the weight down.
Right.
Can he really play third base? He's got some power, but he's not getting to it in games. You can kind of imagine. He was kind of fat when he was a teenager, and then he grew out of it. Tamar doesn't have any of those specific issues, but it's just you can imagine limitations just because of his size and position. But I think he's got the best hit power tool in the high school class, and I think he's a better now hit power combo than a lot of college players in this draft. So if you're just looking at who is the best and most polished that also comes with some upside, I think he's the guy, and that's why I have him second on the list, because if you focus on those 2 things, the 2 most important things in baseball projecting players is hit power and how far along are they for their age. He's the best at that.
When the Orioles clinched the number 1 pick, or what we thought was going to be the number 1 pick, because obviously there was a lot to be hammered out with the CBA, but when they clinched what we thought was going to be the number 1 pick, it felt like at the time, Kiley, that there was a lot of conversation surrounding Elijah Green. Why has that dissipated a bit over the course of the last 6 months or so?
I would say starting a year ago, going into the summer, he was seen as the best guy, but it was close. And 2 years ago, he was seen as, this might be the Bryce Harper, the best guy for the last 10 years.
Right.
Because he went to IMG from the high school he was at, and which means he's basically facing 88 to 90 or better in every game and playing 30, 40 games per spring. And is playing with multiple I think they had 2 top 2 round picks on last year's team. They have 2 more in addition to him on this year's team. So they're getting, there's 30 scouts at every single game, and they're facing good competition. And he's been doing that for 2 years. And then compare that to Tamar Johnson, where it's guys literally can't throw strikes when they're trying to against him. The spring look is very different. And you can actually, that's a level of competition where it's certain days it's as good as a mid-major college. And he's 17, 18 years old facing that. The reason he was talked about as potentially that Bryce Harper, Justin Upton kind of guy is as a 16-year-old, he had 30 home run raw power in the big leagues. He was a 70 runner, which, could steal 30, 40 bases. He had at least a plus arm. It was just the sort of physical combo of power, speed, arm strength was some of the best we've ever seen at this age group. The issue has been, again, he's facing better competition, but he's been tinkering with his swing. There's been some contact issues. With 2 strikes, he doesn't really move his hands or feet. He just kind of stands there and hits the ball. And I've seen him with that swing hit the ball 110 miles an hour. So you get an idea. This is his dad played in the NFL. He's 6'3", 215, and is a fantastic athlete. So you can understand sort of the upside here and why people would get excited. But then as you drill down, it's just not quite as polished as you want. And so if he goes to a team that's very good at, hitting development and really dialing in an approach both mechanically and what kind of pitches you're looking for, I think he could really, be that sort of dynamic talent. If he goes to a team that isn't good at that, or it just turns out things don't come to him as easily against, 95 on the black and then plus slider away, that kind of thing, it's going to be a lot of ups and downs trying to dial that in. Whereas Druw Jones and Tamar Johnson have a little less upside, but come with that certainty of you've never seen them not hit before, which is at the top of the draft. People get fired over guys not making it out of A-ball at this level. So it kind of scares everybody a little bit.
He, of course, is, as Kiley mentions, he's actually the son of former Ravens tight end Eric Green. Elijah Green is. Kiley McDaniel with us here on Glenn Clark Radio. Kiley, if it is a college bat for the Orioles at number one, is it a consensus that it's Brooks Lee from Cal Poly?
No,
Okay.
I have him tops amongst the college position players, and the short version on Brooks Lee is can really hit, has enough power, is a college shortstop, is probably a third baseman. Was actually seen as a fringe first rounder that would have signed out of college, but had a back issue, had a procedure, and so that I think he's past that now. But it sort of speaks to some of the I guess lack of upside compared to some of these other players, where it's like probably a really good hitter that plays third base that hits 15, 20 homers and gets there pretty quickly and has some certainty. But you're thinking like a Kyle Seager if everything goes perfectly. It's just not quite as exciting a kind of guy. That's the kind of guy you take if you don't like what you're looking at in terms of those three high school position players and the prices. If you then think Brooks Lee will be close to as good as them, then you'll take him for $1.5 million less and be happy with it. The other guy that I think the Orioles may like more is Jacob Berry at LSU, who is sophomore eligible, is younger for the class, came from Arizona, transferred with the coach Jay Johnson, and I believe has more home runs than strikeouts this year in the SEC, which is the best amateur level of competition on earth. And is like a decent right fielder. I think a comp in terms of position and level and all those sorts of things is J.J. Bleday, who's had a little bit of a rough go for unrelated reasons in pro ball, but he was fourth overall a couple years ago because he basically just like hit the hell out of the ball and hit like 25 home runs in the SEC for Vanderbilt. And it's like, oh, this guy's a good right fielder and he can hit for power, and like how could this go wrong? And it's just been okay in pro ball. I think Jacob Berry will, suffer a little bit because of that. But if you're just looking for the most advanced now hit power tool in the draft, it's this guy. The problem is there's not a ton of speed and defense. He's played a little third base in the past. It's probably more right field and maybe just fringy at right field. So you better get a lot of savings and be really sure the bat's going to play, because you're getting toward that, Torkelson, Andrew Vaughn thing where it's like if they come to the big leagues and don't hit, then what do you really have?
Right. That's what you come back to. Like, can you take a right fielder number one overall? Like no matter what, can you do that? Can you as an organization take a right fielder with a number one overall pick?
And I think if you cut there, because that would be a similar move to taking Heston Kjerstad number 2 overall, you have to know who you're spending those savings on and have a deal done and have a couple backup options and know that you're going to be able to get to that money and kind of get your money out of it. Because there are instances we've seen in the past where teams will cut with their first 3 picks, and then they just have to take whoever's left over and basically let the league decide who the leftover is. And you basically went from the 3rd best player in the draft to the 8th best player in the draft for players, to be named that everyone will dictate to you who they are. That's like the only wrong answer up here. So I feel like if you go to Berry or Lee, you have to know what those 2nd and 3rd moves are. And then because there's, 20, 30 picks in between, you have to have backup plans because not everyone's going to get through that you want.
Are those players to be had that would make it worth it in this draft?
Yeah, the interesting part of this draft is, I don't have the number in front of me, but I believe of my last rankings, of the top 32, I had 25 position players. So what that means is there's going to be a lot of teams that are just like, we're going to take a, very consensus position player with our first pick. And then there are a ton of pitchers. I think there's 8 Tommy Johns of players in the first 2 rounds of pitchers. There's a number of, like these days, there's a lot of data on all these pitchers. So it's like, oh, we like this kind of fastball and this sort of, frame and athleticism. So between that and all the injured pitchers and some of the guys with lighter stuff that are performing well, or maybe guys that fit a team's player development approach, like, oh, we can make this guy throw harder, he's already got the changeup. Everyone's got their own flavor of pitcher. I think over half the league is going to take a consensus position player, either high school or college, with their first pick, and then pick their flavor of pitcher, whatever that happens to be, with their second pick, and maybe third pick. And I've said that to a couple scouts that are, in the room making these picks, and they're like, yeah, that's probably what 15 or 20 teams will do. And there's a couple first-round pitchers who come from very wealthy families from the high school end that can probably float their way into that second round if they want to. If, some team like Baltimore plans to cut up top and they have $5 million more than everybody else at their second pick, then that gives them the power to pick which one of those guys they want at their next pick.
Well, but as I let you go, how does Kumar Rocker factor into this draft?
It's a good question. The plan, as I best understand it right now, is he will show up in an independent league to be announced. It sounds like he wants to announce it. And he'll start throwing in the next month or so. I think he'll sort of ramp up, throw 2-3 innings at a time, maybe throw 4 or 5 times, broadly speaking, something like that. The day after he didn't sign last year, I said, a team that is open to signing players from his advisor will take him for an overslot bonus in the 2nd or 3rd round, because there's so much uncertainty. They'll rush him to the big leagues, and once he throws 30 innings in relief in the big leagues, he will be worth his bonus, and that will lower expectations to a manageable level for him for what this is, which is like a giant injury question. And I think that's very common with a lot of, relievers in the big leagues. Like, maybe they could start, maybe they can't. Maybe there's injury problems, maybe there's command problems, maybe the stuff goes up and down, like maybe. But like we know if you sign a guy that throws 30 good innings and you gave him $5 million as a free agent, that's pretty good. And I think that's the level at which the expectation should be for Kumar Rocker. And I don't really see him going in the first 30 picks, but he could go anywhere from 35 to 75, depending on how the rest of this and sharing his medicals and all that stuff sort of plays out.
Is the talent still worth it?
I think so, but the talent is so tied in the medical questions that 29 teams, everyone other than the Mets, they don't know what it is.
Yep.
And it's sort of, this happened with Brady Aiken back in the day where it was like one team was very scared by this. We don't know how bad it was. Then all the teams see it and you find out like, oh, it's not quite as bad as we thought, but it's still a lot of different opinions. And then he gets drafted 17th overall and never gets out of rookie ball. So like the track record of a team was like scared to death of this medical is like generally not that good, but it's still a pretty short track record. And I've found in general, when this sort of thing happens, like teams are asking me like, hey, where do you think Kumar's going to go? Because like they know what their doctor said. They want to know what the other 28 doctors think because they don't know where that means he should go. They know where they want to take him, but they'd love to get him around later for a little less money if they could. And all that hasn't played out yet. So we just don't really know if it's compensation round, a bunch of teams want to get him and rush him to the big leagues, or second, third round, or some teams think he's a starter. Some teams aren't worried about the medical at all and think the Mets are crazy. Like all of those things are on the table.
At Kiley McD on Twitter is how you follow him. Of course, ESPN.com and ESPN Insider see all of his stuff. Is there anything else I should be plugging for you, Kiley? The book, maybe?
Yeah, the book Future Value is in paperback now, and it's the sort of elevator pitch is it's the answer to Moneyball. After all of that number stuff started happening, Eric Longenhagen used to work with me at Fangraphs, wrote about like how the game is now actually changing. Now that all the stuff that Michael Lewis talked about has sort of played out, now we have all of this sort of StatCast and things like that, the things that are actually replacing scouts. How is that now changing baseball?
Kiley McDaniel, can't wait to do this again as we get a little bit closer to the MLB draft. Appreciate you taking the time for us this morning, sir. Thank you for doing it.
Yep, thank you.
Kiley McDaniel from ESPN checking in with us here on GCR. It's our first weekly MLB draft segment. We will be doing those as we continue to plow along towards the Orioles in July having the number 1 pick in the draft.